Good afternoon to you, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for Monday, August the 4th, 2014. Today, we take a look at the climatology graph. We are approximately right here, the first few days of August, so we're starting the ramping up of the climatological peak of the season, which occurs around September the 10th. So as you can see, we have a ways to go climatology-wise. We'll see if we follow that curve this year. So far, we're a little bit ahead of where we should be, having Hurricane Bertha. The second hurricane usually doesn't come until after August the 4th, if memory serves, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Another way to look at the climatology is the first 10 days of August. You see the distribution of storms and hurricanes over the last 100 years, and most of the Atlantic now is generally favorable from a climatological perspective. Sea surface temperature is warm enough. Now it's just a matter of getting seedlings in to develop something from and the atmosphere to cooperate. And then the Eastern Pacific stays very busy this time of year as well, and this week is no exception to that. Before we get into what we have out there, first let's look at sea surface temperature departures from normal. The subtropical Atlantic remaining quite a bit above the long-term average, as is the Gulf of Mexico, and even the deep tropics not in too bad a shape. Relatively speaking, there are some patches of very cold anomalies here, but they're not widespread, and they seem to be transient. In the Pacific, we see this ribbon of colder than normal anomalies showing up, where we should have had an El Nino, according to a lot of the experts, several months ago, but that has not come to pass. And you can also see a little bit of the cold wakes left behind from these different tropical cyclones roaming around in the east central Pacific. Speaking of that, taking a look at the Western Hemisphere shot, there is Bertha in the Atlantic Basin, Julio in the Pacific, and Isel just a little bit to the west of Julio. And that is the Hawaiian island chain, so we'll get into that in a moment. First, let's look at Julio real quick. This is the 5-day track map of Julio. There is the big island of Hawaii, so it's beyond the 5-day range. We're going to have to watch this one. It could be formidable enough to cause some problems, but first, of course, there is Isel, which is closing in on Hawaii in the next few days. Luckily, sea surface temperatures out this way start to cool off. Even along the path now, even though it's a major hurricane, water temperatures are only right at about 80 degrees, but the atmosphere for the time being is very conducive for development, and so Isel has been able to strengthen and maintain its very powerful 100, what is it? Let me look at, make sure I know what I'm talking about here. So it's 140 miles per hour. That is nothing to sneeze at. And as it closes in on Hawaii, though, the good news is it will weaken and become a tropical storm. It's forecast to anyway. And it still will bring some heavy rainfall, gusty winds, rough surf conditions there, more so than they're used to seeing. So this is something to be taken seriously for sure. Now in the Atlantic Basin, we have Hurricane Bertha. Became a hurricane this morning. Recon flew in and measured hurricane force winds. And it's not the most well-organized storm we've ever seen, but it's a hurricane nonetheless. There's the forecast track with the center of the cone outlined by my red telestration. You can see that it is forecast to remain well offshore of the United States, the Canadian Maritimes, maybe getting close enough to the Cape Race, Newfoundland area that you might want to keep an extra eye on it. Other than that, the tropics are not of a concern. One thing to mention about Bertha, though, it will kick up the surf, and any increase in the rough waves, sea state, etc., can be a problem, especially for novice swimmers and children. Be careful out there. Surfers will delight in what's coming with these swells, but they too need to be careful. You don't want to get in, no pun intended, over your head and get stuck out there and be in need of rescue. Hopefully that won't be an issue, so just keep aware of that. All right, that is it from me for today. I'll be back later in the week with another update on Isel and Julio in the eastern to eventually central Pacific. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, and of course for Hurricane Pro and HD. Have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you again in a few days.